tonight, it's Marisol Balderas, who says, I couldn't get my question answered last time, but I understand you have many, so I will try again. The public school system is horrible. Children are taught not to question the government. They occasionally have their parents' property taken away and then ask money in return to give you back your own property. Global warming and evolution are taught as fact, and feminization of boys is common. What can be done about it? Thanks. I might as well just go there, whatever. There's only one part of this that I find, like I said, I'll just go there. Look, first of all, your point is absolutely right, Marisol. They are making socialists. We talked earlier about this generation and how weak they are. But the thing that they're really doing is they're making socialists. No wonder they love Bernie. They've never been allowed to excel. They've never been able to come in first. They've never won things or lost things. They want everybody's pretty much the same, and everybody should get the same share, and everybody gets the same number of gold stars, and they get the same salary, and they get the same everything, and they're making them into socialists. They're turning everything that we used to believe on its head and making that part of the thing. And you're getting political indoctrination and radicalization in math classes and science classes and all the rest. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and open up this can of worms because I had this argument at the Horowitz retreat. I had this exact argument at the Horowitz retreat this last weekend down in Palos Verdes. So let me tell you how it came about last time. When I was up at the Jewish high school, I told them in advance, I talked to the rabbi, very progressive school, it's a Jewish high school in Palo Alto. It's about as progressive as you get. And so I said, look, rather than me doing a 45-minute speech, where they're just going to sit there and snort and roll their eyes at me the whole time, why don't I simply give them 5 minutes of the things that I believe, the core beliefs I believe in. I believe in free enterprise, I believe in business over government, I believe in gun rights, I believe in lots of energy, I believe in strong defense, I believe in capitalism over socialism. Just give it to them in 5 minutes and then let them ask questions. And then during the day I can take questions and that way they'll be attacking me rather than me, spewing at them, and their defenses should come down and so on. Now, one byproduct of this that I had not counted on until I realized it on the way home after this event was, what I hadn't realized was, since they knew in advance that I was not really going to say much other than just an initial statement of principles and that the whole event was about taking questions, on the drive home I realized that I could tell an awful lot about what they thought about conservatives by the kind of questions that they asked. They asked questions about, are there reasonable restrictions on gun control that you believe in? And I said, only that felons are not allowed to own guns. You prove it's not a felon. I think that's the only restriction, but I think that's a reasonable restriction. They asked about gay marriage, and I said, look, there's nothing about gay marriage in the Constitution. There's nothing about straight marriage in the Constitution. It's got nothing to do with the federal government. I don't think it has anything to do with the government at all. As a matter of fact, kids, the reason that you have to get a state marriage license and that the state can say you two can get married but you two can't is because the Democrats, after the Civil War, made it law that you had to have the approval of the government to get married in the form of a license because they were trying to stop black people from marrying white people. Just throw a little hand grenade out there just to get their attention, which is true. So I said, it's not the government's business. It's got nothing to do with them. But if you agree that the government doesn't have the right to say you can't marry these people, you also have to agree that the government doesn't have the right to say that you have to marry them. That if you find a congregation that wants to marry two men together or two women, fine, that's great. And as long as they're happy, I don't care. It's no skin off of my nose. None of my business, none of the government's business. But if you are saying that the government now has to go into congregations that think this is a sin and tell them that they must marry gay people if they want to, now you're talking about something that's actually in the Constitution, which is the First Amendment. So they asked me all these questions about the poor. They asked me questions, and they were setting me up. So here's where I'm going to go wading into the waters here. They said, what do you think about, as a conservative and Republican, what do you think about science? And I said, I'm in favor of it. And I got a little laugh, and then I said, but what you're really asking me is, how do I feel about science inserting itself into politics? And they said, yeah, that's exactly it. So I'll tell you what I told them. I said, look, I've been a scientist. I've worked in labs. I've worked in a geochronology lab for 3 or 4 years. I worked as an astronomy assistant. I taught astronomy at the Miami Planetarium for years. I'm not a scientist, but I play one on TV. I understand how it works. I said there are some areas of science that I think are rock solid and others that aren't. I think evolution is rock solid. I don't think there's any question about it. And then I started telling them why I don't think that global warming is rock solid. I think global warming is very, very compromised in a way that evolution isn't. Evolution has astonishing, it's absolutely amazing degrees of actual evidence. I don't think, for me, there's no question about it, none. And I got into this discussion. I said this at the event, and then afterwards people came up and said, did you read this book? Did you read that book about, intelligent design? I said, yeah, well, yes, I've either read them or I know the argument. And I was talking with these guys, and one guy said, well, if evolution is true, how come a cat has never turned into a dog? And I said, the fact that you can ask me that question means that you do not understand the theory. It's like me telling you that the Yankees are the greatest baseball team ever because they've scored more touchdowns than any other baseball team. You have just revealed to me, by making that statement, that you don't understand it. Well, what are you saying, that if you took all these pieces of a watch and threw them on the floor, it would just assemble into a watch out of chance? I say, no, I'm not saying that at all. And that's not what evolution says either. Evolution says that that it is a ratchet, that things that are successful are kept and things that aren't successful are rejected. And I think that this is just the entire science of biology is built on this theory, and the genetics that came after the theory match the theory, and everything is in line there. And they would say, well, what about transitional, what about, there are no transitional species, no transitional fossils. I said, well, of course there are transitional fossils. Archaeopteryx is a perfect transitional fossil. It's halfway between a dinosaur and a bird. It has feathers, and it's got a bird-like stance, but it's primarily reptilian. It has reptilian teeth. It's a perfect example. These fish with the fins down on the bottom and proto-lungs, and all of the different hominid ancestors, and Australopithecus and Homo erectus and all the rest of these guys, they're all transitional forms. Of course they're transitional forms. And, this guy said, well, here's this problem. Now, look, that doesn't mean that I think the universe is necessarily mechanistic. I've come to think that that there may be something to the fact that the universe was created entire, has always been there, will always be there, and is based on information. It's based on information. So I'm open to that. But if that's true, then this is the mechanism that's been chosen. It's the mechanism, and it's clear. Now, somebody said that a creature is a billion times more complex than a watch. True, but you've had a billion times longer to build it too, right? This is the thing. It's like, I heard a person arguing against evolution 25, 30 years ago, and they said that it's like expecting that that the Concorde could just come out of nowhere, the supersonic jetliner. And then he talked about all the navigation systems that would have to be in place and all the complexity that would have to be in place simultaneously to make the Concorde. And he was saying, so it can't happen. You can't have a bird because, like the Concorde, the Concorde has to have a radio system, has to have jet engines, has to have a fuel system, has to have navigation systems, has to have pressurization. And like that, a bird has to have this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. It just can't possibly assemble itself out of nowhere. And my response to that was, true, but the first airplane was not the Concorde. The first airplane didn't have a electrical system. It didn't have a navigation system. It wasn't supersonic. It didn't have retractable landing gear. It didn't have any of those things. Those things were added incrementally over time and tested, and what worked, and what didn't. And he just disproved his own argument and proved mine, I think. If you're going to contend that the world is 6,000 years old, then that's your business, and I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm not going to tell you why I think you're wrong. It's your business. Like I said, it's not up to me. But, and this is not just political. If I don't make arguments that are just political. I make my politics about reality. I don't try to bring reality into my politics. If it turns out that by denying evolution and denying global warming in the same sentence, that to me is just nuts. There is no possible comparison of these two things. It's not like there's a computer model and that all of this theory of evolution was predicated on a computer model that would predict the results of evolution over time. If it turned out that that was the case, then you would just laugh it out of court. And you can't realistically weigh the evidence and put these two things together. So, look, you're welcome to disagree with me. You're welcome to completely disagree. You're welcome to get mad like these people at the event did. You can storm out and never see me again. That's fine. It's nice. I don't want to say I don't care, but I'm not going to change my mind over it. But there is no question that the evidence for this, in terms of tracking the genes back, in terms of the fossil record, in terms of the dating of the sediments, in terms of all of this stuff, it's really, really consistent and solid. And you have to ask yourself, if it is in fact the result of a creator, why would he put so many of these false clues into the world that he built and make them all so consistently interlocking? You know, I mean, radiocarbon is working on the same scales. Like plate tectonics are involved when you get into the fossils, and you find all of these things are consistent. And to say evolution is predicated on the philosophy of atheism, Dr. Think is just not true. It's not. It's not a religion. Evolution is not a philosophy. It's a scientific theory. Now, there are in science different tiers of truth. There are different tiers of truth. On the top, you have laws. Laws are irrefutable. A law may be enlarged upon, but a law cannot be contradicted because it's not a law then. So in other words, the gravitational rate of acceleration is constant in a 1g field. No matter where you measure it, anywhere on the Earth, in 1g field, it's going to be 32 feet per second. That's a law. It's the same everywhere. Laws of gravitation are laws. The laws of thermodynamics are laws. The arrow of time is a law. You cannot contradict the second law of thermodynamics. You can't. Over time, things run down. And so these things are known for certainty. What you can do is you can develop theories that include what used to be a law into a larger theory that explains more. And a great example of this kind of thing is relativity and Newtonian physics. So in Newtonian physics, you have Newton, who has the laws of gravitation, first, second, third laws of motion, and dealing with relatively large objects like planets over relatively long time, like centuries or millennia, but not too long a time, like, billions of years, works perfectly well. But once you start getting onto the margins of things that move quickly or over very, very long periods of time, then you start seeing errors appearing into Newtonian physics. And Einstein's theory of relativity explains the same thing that Newton's does, but also is wider. So relativity did not negate Newtonian physics. It enlarged upon Newtonian physics and basically said that Newtonian physics is a pretty simple way of looking at a fairly narrow slice of the universe in terms of relatively big objects moving relatively slowly. It works perfectly, but it's not the entire answer, and that's why you're starting to see some effects on the margins, because relativity is starting to act outside of the parameters of Newtonian physics. Now, a different thing than this would be the idea of the Big Bang theory versus the steady state theory. You look out into the universe in the 1910 or 20 or somewhere around there, early 1900s, and you measure redshift, which is a law. Doppler shift is a law. That's just the same, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's what it is. And so you look out into the universe with these sophisticated telescopes, and you begin to do this you begin to measure the spectrums of these things. And you find out that the further something away is, the more it's redshifting, the faster it's moving away from you. Now, that's evidence. That's indisputable evidence. That's consistent, indisputable evidence. Something is getting bigger. The universe is getting bigger. That's a law. But whether the universe was created from a big bang, which was an initial explosion, or whether it was a steady state where, hard to believe now, but when I grew up, when I was born, this was the dominant theory, was that the universe is simply assembling itself in the middle and is just flowing outwards like a stream. That's not a law, that's a theory. And when the Big Bang, evidence for Big Bang became more and more and more prevalent, the evidence against the steady state theory became equally in evidence, and therefore it negated it. So the steady state theory and the Big Bang theory are not laws, but the Big Bang theory is a theory, yes, but it is a theory with a great deal of evidence behind it. And then below a well-evidenced theory are badly evidenced theories. And evolution is a superbly evidenced theory. It is a theory, but it is superbly evidenced. The data there and the it's astonishing. I mean, it's really, to me, there's no question about it. Global warming is nothing like that. There's nothing like that. And when people try to catch me on evolution, when they try to say, well, what about this, what about that, they ask questions that in their asking tell me they don't understand the theory. How did man evolve from monkeys? Well, they didn't evolve from monkeys. They evolved from a common ancestor. Man and monkeys both did. How come there's not more of the transitional records? How come everything's stable and then it changes? It's like, well, you have a mutation, and one mutation comes along, and it's either successful or it's not. If it's not successful, it'll be selected out. If it is, it might be passed on. If it's noticeably successful, then it will be passed on, and the less successful alternative will slowly breed out because it's not going to be able to eat as much. They're not going to pass down as many kids. So there's this punctuated equilibrium. You've got a stable organism, and then the environment changes, and then it either changes to the new environment, becomes something slightly different quickly over geological time, or it dies out. And I just don't see any question about it. And the reason I bring all this up is, and the reason I waded into this, even though I know some people don't agree with this, is this. They're not the same. I cannot reasonably attack global warming and say that evolution is mystery, is false too. That to me is the reasonable position. The evidence for evolution is overwhelming. The evidence for global warming is poor. So what do you say? I say, you can't attack global warming. You can do whatever you want to. I can't attack global warming and deny evolution. I can't attack global warming and deny the second law of thermodynamics. I can't deny all science equally. I can only deny bad science. I can only point out bad science. So there you go. There you go. If you want to make the case that DNA is so incredibly unlikely that it had to be designed by somebody else, go ahead and make that case if you want to. That's fine. But you can't deny that the DNA has changed, and that this self-replicating molecule has allowed complexity of a level that is absolutely astonishing, but nevertheless is true. Natural selection, it just makes so much sense to me. And the idea of change through mutation, the whole theory is just, it's logically sound and consistent. And again, I'm not going to beat this to death because, there's no sense beating a dead Eohippus. But the evidence is I think, overwhelming and conclusive. And so I put that in the level of not a law, but a very well-supported theory. And, there you go. I think they were expecting me to say I don't believe in evolution and I don't believe in any of this stuff, and that's not what they got from me. I don't think they got what they thought they were going to get from me. They didn't get the conservative caricature that they thought I was going to be, and that actually surprised them, and I think also pleased them quite a bit. They were as friendly as they could be, these kids. They got me a birthday cake, and it's, you could tell that they were thinking about things. Just to wrap this up, I have come to believe that if we're talking about the larger structure of the universe, the actual bubble that Earth is a microscopic speck in, I think the evidence for that's unlikelihood, and the fact that I've come to believe that there's no longer, that time is an illusion, that time is our perception of travel through the fourth dimension. If time is our perception of travel through the fourth dimension, then the universe has always been here, will always be here, and it's not like it's always been there and it's constantly changing into something that will always be there. Its beginning and end have been created or appeared whole, and this is just us moving the needle down the groove of the record. You don't say when you play an LP, most kids don't even know what an LP is, but when you play an LP, you don't assume that everything in front of the needle, coming to the needle, doesn't exist yet. You know that the needle is simply a position on a record that's been pressed out, and at the front of the record, the back of the record, the order of the record, all of it is done. It's always been there. So if you imagine the universe as a record that has always been there, an LP, always been there, always will be there, always has been there. Who made it? I don't know. Who created it? I don't know. I don't know. Did it create itself? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. One of the things you get into in these really advanced levels of cosmology now, when you really get out into cosmology, you start to get into things in quantum and observation where you face the really interesting evidence, right? This isn't just theory, this is evidence. You observe something on a quantum level, it changes. The more you observe it, the more it changes. You observe two particles that are neutral and you make one observation, the other one instantly becomes the other, and it happens faster than the speed of light. That's been measured. That's pretty weird. So the idea that when you start to mix all this stuff up and look as far out as these monkey brains can, you begin to think that the universe is actually structured around information, that it's actually built around consciousness, and that you can make a compelling case mathematically through quantum interactions and the structure of things. You can make a compelling case that it's not like the universe existed and then life developed out of the universe, that the consciousness pre-existed everything, and that the universe had to take care of itself. The universe formed for the consciousness rather than consciousness just arose out of the universe. Structure of the universe may be information, and if it's information, it was created by a complex consciousness, and it doesn't matter what was there before then. Now, to take the other side of the argument, just so you know I can do these two things, I happen to think this is true too. Dawkins, who's a wizard. Dawkins is a brilliant guy when it comes to genetics and evolution, and The Selfish Gene is an incredible book and a real interesting way to look at creatures. But Dawkins says that if you're going to claim that the universe was created by God, then who made God? You have to go back a step, but you don't. The fact that he says who preceded God, who gave birth to God, what did God come from, how did he evolve, whatever, that is a blind spot in his thinking that limits him to being smart about genetics, but not very smart about religion and philosophy. This whole idea of before and after is almost impossible for us to shake, but I am getting some practice in it. And if you can understand that time is essentially an illusion, that we're the needle on the record, that yes, at the exact moment where we're talking right now, it's playing Summer Wind by Frank Sinatra, and he's right in the middle of this beat, and then he's going to go to the next beat. If you believe that, that's fine. But you can understand that where the needle is now is no more real or less real than any other part of the record, just happens to be where the consciousness or the needle is right at this moment. So there is no before and after. You don't have to answer the question of where did God come from, or who existed before God, or who were God's parents, or what did God evolve from. You don't have to answer that, because the fact that you're asking the question in the first place is an indication that you're still thinking of before and after. And we simply do not have the brain power to understand infinity and eternity. We don't have the brain power. It's beyond our ability to emotionally connect to. We can intellectually do amazing things as a species, amazing things, like these theories, for example. But emotionally, you can't connect to the idea that there had to be a beginning, right? Well, you go back all the, no, there had to be a beginning. No. There has to be an end someday. No. The universe is expanding into what? Expanding into nothingness. What's on the other side of the expanding bubble of the universe? Nothing. You mean a vacuum? No. It doesn't. There's nothing. It doesn't exist. You can't handle it. You can't get there. I can't get there anyway. I can understand it intellectually, but emotionally, these are the kind of questions we ask because we're dealing with such a small slice of the actual universe. We're dealing with such a small visible spectrum. We're talking about a very limited range of sizes and very limited ranges of time scales and limited perception, and you just can't get there from here emotionally. But intellectually, you can walk yourself through this maze and say, yes, it's always been there. It's always going to be there. It was created and is in existence and will always be there. And if it's made out of information, then it's made out of consciousness. So here I am telling you that in my estimation, it's possible that the universe is nothing but chance. It seems extremely unlikely. But on the other hand, evolution has so much verifiable evidence that that no matter where the structure of the universe came from, the mechanism for biology on Earth is evolution through natural selection with messengers of DNA and gene selection. That's what I believe. That's what I think the evidence supports. And you have to tell people that you understand enough about the science to be able to say, now, on the other hand, global warming may be true, but you're going to have to do a lot better than what you're doing now. I told him, look, if you go stand in Kansas, which is, not the number one tourist destination in the world, but if you were to go put yourself right square in the middle of Kansas and stand out in a wheat field, you would be standing on a spot that 10,000 years ago was under almost a mile of ice, but 100 million years ago was under 200 feet of water. That 200 million years ago there was an inland sea right on the spot you're in now where Kansas is, and that there were plesiosaurs and pterodactyls and brachiosaurs there were T-Rexes or whatever running around on the shore, and there were ferns, and it was this golden paradise back when the CO2 levels were 3 times higher than they are now. Not 30%, but 3 times higher. And now this dusty plain of grass is what happens when CO2 levels get critically low to where they are now. So that's true. And if it's not true, and this would be my question too, right? I mean, if it's not true, then why are there seashells in Kansas? Not just how, but why? If it is in fact a 6,000-year-old Earth that was manufactured for man, why would God do something like that? Why would he put seashells and stuff in the middle of a continent and make sure that as you went down and dug deeper that everything happened consistently and that everything basically just kind of fits? Seems a little mean-spirited to me. But anyway, and people say, wish you could see the documentary Case for Creation, Case for a Creator. Look, as far as the creator goes, like I said, I've come a long way on this. I think you can make a compelling case about a creator. I think you can make a compelling case about the structure of the universe being too unlikely to have happened by random chance. But once it gets in there, the mechanism for life changing is really well understood, and so is the evidence for the age of the Earth. It's not just one thing, It's not like it's just somebody takes a shot out there. As the experiments become more refined, our date gets better, and now we're looking pretty much at a 13, 14 billion-year-old universe with stars that are evolving at a known rate out of clouds of interstellar gas, which were originally just hydrogen in these population 2 stars. And then as these stars explode after a process of nuclear fusion over the course of millions or billions of years, they create heavy elements in the core. These elements in the core spread out when the star goes supernova. They form new nebulae, the new raw materials of other stars, and over time they gravitationally collapse and form younger stars like our sun, which is population 2 star. And because we are the product of 14 billion years, or 10 anyway, of stellar conversion of light elements into heavier ones as a byproduct of their fusion actions, there is enough carbon and phosphorus and calcium to make people and planets and all the rest of that stuff. So the age of the universe, the age of the Earth, radioactive decay, plate tectonics, evolution, expansion of the universe, all these measurements make sense. They're consistent and they're coherent, and they cross the boundaries. If the age of the Earth were determined to be one thing by biologists and determined to be something completely different by geologists, you'd have a real problem there. And likewise, if the expansion of the universe said that no, it looks like this thing's only been blowing up for 3 million years. And then your evolutionary scientist said, well, we need 4.5 billion years or 3 billion years for this to happen. Then you'd have a real problem. You'd have a real problem. But you don't, because they all match. So I think it's arrogant to say that the universe is not built in the way that it's built. I don't know the purpose or the mind, or if there was a purpose or a mind. But what I do know is, if there is a purpose or a mind, it is what it is, right? Certainly we can agree with this, that the Earth and the universe that we find ourselves in is what it is, and that we can ask questions and learn about it, that there are predictable laws and we can figure things out. So it is what it is. Why it is what it is a different question, but it is what it is. And since what it is contains a fossil record, and since what it is contains a redshift expansion and a measurable volume of space, and since what it is contains a radioactive decay at a certain rate and plate tectonics at a certain rate, it is what it is. It is those things. So that's telling you that it's something. So now, if on the other hand, this is why I think I'm in an interesting place and a somewhat interesting person. If on the other hand, well, that is true, and I believe it's true, then you run into people who make that their religious and philosophical beliefs, which I think is absolutely absurd. You know, when you hear people say, "What do you believe in?" I believe in science. That's absurd. That's a silly thing to say. It's not just throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's never filling the tub. I mean, you can't say that all of this stuff is a philosophy or a religion or provides moral support or confirms or destroys any particular religious theory. It is an entirely separate domain. And for people to say that I believe in science means that they believe a religion that is a mechanistic religion. It's an atheistic, mechanistic, very material view of the world, and they perceive that belief system to be true because it conforms to the evidence in the world, and to some degree it does conform to the evidence of the world, but it only conforms to the evidence of the world if you look at the world through a cocktail straw. The things that are much bigger and much smaller and much older and much younger, all this stuff is a much more complex proposition than people like these secular humanists believe. And I ought to know, because I was one of them. I mean, I thought I had it all figured out. Nothing. No, I didn't have it all figured out. I understand the mechanisms of life on Earth and the changes in the Earth, and I understand the basic mechanisms of how stars form. But that's not religion, and that's not the final say. You start to get down into the quantum world and the supergravity world, and then things start happening that are evidence. There's evidence, experimental evidence, repeatable experimental evidence that comes back with the correct mathematical value that says again and again and again and again and again and again and again, the structure of the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. There are things that happen that we can observe that just don't make sense. And so we have to find a way to make sense out of them. And the fact that they don't make sense is an indication. The fact that they don't make sense and are true, that is an indication that the world is a lot more complex than these secular atheists give it credit for. A lot more complex. And that's why I find them to be as close-minded as any other religious fundamentalist regarding the creation of this. In fact, I think they're far more close-minded than religious fundamentalists, because I think religious fundamentalists hear the evolution argument and agree or disagree with it, but I don't think these people ever really understand the creation argument at all. Well, that was our money's worth, but that's what the show's all about. You never know when the rabbit goes into the hole. You never know what hole it's going to come out of. So there you go. I look at science as a tool. It's a scalpel. It can be an axe. It can be the most powerful, without question, the most powerful tool we have. It's a way about thinking about the physical world that predicts outcomes. And in that regard, it is extraordinarily powerful. But it's not a belief system. It's a tool. It's like people saying, I believe in a scalpel. What do you believe in? I believe in an axe. Seems odd. Science is not a belief system. And science is not a warehouse of knowledge like the big warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark where we store information. Science is a way of asking a very specific and narrow set of questions about nature and interrogating it in such a way as to remove as much bias as possible, and therefore, as long as we get consistent answers that are repeatable and match in terms of the expected values, tells us something that if it's not true, then the word true has no meaning. So there you go. So many people rebel against this. They have such an emotional reaction against evolution because the proponents of evolution are not using it as a theory. They're using it politically and they're using it religiously. They're using evolution as a means of destroying or discrediting religion, and that is not what evolution is or should be. And when I said that I run into either creationists or intelligent design people that ask a question in such a way that makes me believe that they do not understand the theory at all, likewise, I also run into people who make statements initially that show me that they do not understand anything about truth or anything about what's actually possible, what's actually going on. So it's a sword that cuts both ways. And look, when it's all said and done, this is what I believe. But I would say one of the skills that I have is the ability to weigh evidence. If my entire personal history is anything, and my conversion I was naturally conservative. I wanted to shoot down communists at supersonic speeds. It's pretty much as American as it gets. But having been a liberal and having been a conservative, I can tell you that the level of information I have on these things is not equal. That when I was a liberal, I knew nothing about anything. Now that I'm a conservative, I know everything about everything. And I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong.